Hello, my name is Laura and you can find me on Instagram as Penrose Knits. You can also find me here on YouTube. My channel is also called Penrose Knits and my knitting podcast is called The Knitting Pickle. I'm a knitter, but I'm also going to talk about how podcasting has affected my mental health. I'm going to be talking about eating disorders and poor body image. I'm not going to be discussing any of my behaviours or my weight numbers, but I will be talking about how eating disorders have affected my life. So, a bit of history about me. I have had binge eating disorder since I was about 11 years old. I was going through a difficult time at home at the time and I turned to food as my coping mechanism. And that is a behaviour I've carried with me into adulthood. It's not always prevalent, but when things get difficult, instead of dealing with my feelings and my problems, I would comfort eat. I should probably say that there's actually nothing wrong with comfort eating at all, because food is a comfort, food brings us joy. But when it becomes your only way of coping and your eating becomes excessive, which it did in my case, my binges were quite extreme, then that's not a healthy way to live. That's not good for you and your mental health. So in the summer of 2020, my binge eating disorder became anorexia. I'd also like to say at this point that anorexia is no more serious than binge eating disorder, or maybe binge eating disorder is no less serious than anorexia, which is probably a reason why I didn't realise I had binge eating disorder until this past year, because I wasn't, my body didn't look a certain way, I wasn't, underweight. I didn't think I had an eating disorder. I just thought I was weak and that I had no willpower, or that I hadn't found the perfect diet yet. So if you are feeling like you have got a bad relationship with food or with your body, but you think, oh, I don't have an eating disorder, that doesn't mean you don't deserve help. And I will provide Tom with some resources and some links for if any of this resonates with you at all. So in the summer of 2020, when we went into lockdown, my first reaction was, of course, to binge eat. And the binges came on really strong and really quick. But something else I was then had to deal with was the fact that our society and our government then started to put pressure on not gaining any weight or losing any weight that you might have gained during lockdown. I live in the UK and my government's war on obesity for me was extremely triggering, and I was so terrified of coming out of lockdown gaining any weight that I went on a very intense diet. I'm not going to name it, but that diet was the first step towards anorexia for me. So by the end of the summer I had lost a lot of weight, and I'd also started to experience body dysmorphia. I couldn't see the weight that I'd lost and I was still convinced that I had a lot of weight to lose, even though by that point my behaviours were having a very negative effect on my health. By that point my periods had stopped and I was struggling with feeling faint, and I also had a lot of bruising because my body fat was too low. But I couldn't see any of that because I was so obsessed with being what society tells me I should look like that I completely lost sight of what reality was, and I'd also lost who I was as a person. I stopped knitting. I've been knitting since I was pregnant with my daughter, and it was something I really, really loved. But the eating disorder takes over your life so much that there's no room for anything else. Common misconception is that eating disorders are only about food, whereas the last thing an eating disorder is about is food. It's about not being able to process your feelings, your emotions, using food as a coping mechanism, and in a lot of cases now, believing that your body is not healthy or what it should look like because of the way society has conditioned us to be. We have been conditioned to look a certain way, whereas in reality, the majority of people won't look that way. And though you can change your body to look that way, it's not how your body should be, and it's not sustainable. Anyway, So by the end of summer 2020, fortunately, we moved to the countryside. We lived in a town in the Midlands, and now we live in a village in the Midlands. And I suddenly had access to the outdoors in a way that I hadn't before. I'd also started to realise that my behaviours might not be normal. I'd spoken to a few friends who had also been doing a similar diet, and I remember asking a friend, how often, that was a big B, how often do you feel guilty about what you eat? And she was like, once or twice maybe. And I said, what, a day? And she said, no, ever. I think I've only really felt guilty once or twice in my life about food. And I suddenly realised that for me, I felt guilty about everything I ate. I felt guilty about ketchup. I felt guilty about garlic paste because it had sugar in it. I realised at that point, hang on a minute, something's not right here. And then a little while later, my son, who at the time was 3, woke up one morning and I found him on the scales in our bathroom saying, just checking my numbers, mummy. And I saw what he was doing, and I realised that he was copying my behaviour. And I had a little breakdown at that point on the bathroom floor, suddenly saw what I was doing and threw the scales in the wheelie bin, which was the best thing I've ever done for myself. So from that point on, I started to recover. And because I now have access to nature, I started doing a lot of walking, listening to podcasts. I will give Tom some of the podcasts that I found really, really helpful. So as we went into the second lockdown, I started to do the healing work. I finally recognised my behaviours and realised that there was more to life than what you look like. So, and I know that sounds very idyllic and it sounds really easy, but the truth about recovery is it's very, very difficult. I went from believing a certain thing for my whole entire life to suddenly having to challenge every single thought and everything I thought was right. And it's difficult. It's really, really difficult. And it takes up a lot of brain power. I'm not sure if I mentioned it before, but when I was in the depths of my eating disorder, I'd stopped knitting because it completely takes over your entire life. I spent all my time trying to find recipes, tracking food, over exercising. There was just no room in my life for a craft anymore. So when I went into recovery, one of the things I found useful for knitting, one of the things I found useful about knitting is that when I'm knitting, if I'm working on a stockinette project or a mindless project, it's when I do some of my deepest thinking. Sometimes we all knit with the telly on or something like that, but quite often I'd find myself just craving quiet. When my children had gone to bed or they were napping or they were playing, I'd find myself knitting and really working through some of the thoughts that were in my head. I'd listen to my podcasts. So having something to focus my hands on and give myself something to do, but also allow my mind to wander, was really quite a big part of my recovery. So fast forward to, I think it was March 2021. I've been in recovery for about 6 to 7 months and I was doing quite well. And I'd fully 100% got back into knitting and it had become my passion again. And because of all the headspace that I had cleared in my mind, now that I was no longer obsessed with my body and how I looked, I found I had all this time in my head to start letting all my creativity come out. So I started fiddling about with knitting patterns, trying to get the ideas that were in my head out into the world. And as I was doing this, I realised that I just had so much to say about knitting that I decided to start a podcast. I'd seen a couple of my other friends do them. I really enjoyed watching them. So I just thought, do you know what? I'm going to do it. And then one random afternoon, I sat down in front of the camera and just talked for an hour and I loved it. I'm now on episode 7 or 8, I think, something like that. And it's now one of the most favourite parts of my life. And every time I sit down to edit one of those podcasts, I think I could not have done this a year ago. I could not have sat and looked at my own face and at my own body for hours and hours and hours and editing a video like that. I used to be so critical of myself that I couldn't even look at myself most of the time. And when I did look at myself, I was criticizing myself. So to be able to sit down and do this kind of thing now, it blows my mind that that's even possible. And I think a big part of me feeling safe enough to do that is the knitting community. Now I know the knitting community isn't perfect, and there is a lot of work to do when it comes to inclusivity and diversity, but for me and my experience, the encouragement and feedback that I've had through doing these podcasts has cemented the fact that the thing that makes me me and the thing that makes me deserving of love and respect is not what I look like. It's who I am and what makes me happy and what makes me passionate, and the skills and the knowledge that I have. As well as hating my body and hating the way I looked, I also always thought I was unintelligent. I always thought that I never had anything of value to say. I always thought I was kind of silly and over emotional, but none of that was true. I was just so used to thinking the worst of myself that I just completely suppressed who I was. And as I've been making these podcasts, I found the thing that I get, kind of the comment that I get the most, that fills me with the most joy, is when people say they can relate to me or that they find me funny. And it's insane to hear those comments, because I never thought that's who I was. The only comments that mattered to me was when somebody complimented the way I look. And that is so ridiculous, because the way I look has nothing to do with what I can put into the world. So my advice for anybody who might feel like they've related to anything I've said today is to, first of all, speak to your doctor. Not all eating disorders look the same. You don't have to be really underweight to deserve help. If you feel like your relationship with your body and with food is having a negative effect on your life right now, no matter what your body looks like, you deserve help, and you can get that help. It's out there. In the meantime, there are also so many free resources out there that can help you on your journey to accepting your body and to even loving your body. I will get Tom to link a number of podcasts below that I have found helpful, but you can also diversify your Instagram feed. When I was in the depths of my disorder, my Instagram feed was full of the type of body that I wanted, that I felt like I should have in order to be accepted, and that just made the situation worse. So since then, I now follow so many different accounts of different body types, different body sizes, different skin colours, different ethnicities, different backgrounds, and it just makes you realise that everyone out there is beautiful. Every body type is beautiful, and in the end, the thing that makes a person a good person is who they are and what they can contribute to the world, not what their body looks like. So thank you for watching, and if you're about to start the journey, I'm with you. Feel free to message me on Instagram if you want to talk about this more, and thank you. Bye.